Welcome back to the Astro Tea, my friends. Since we have so many new people joining this community, not only on the podcast, but also on the social platforms, I thought we could continue on with the series of get to know your astrologer a little bit better. It's the perfect opportunity for me to share with you what sort of contributed and shaped me to become an astrologer and three things that actually contributed to my journey of becoming an astrologer. You hear me talk about astrology every single week. You hear me talk about Venus, Mercury, birth charts, manifestation, timing, moon cycles, understanding yourself through astrology. But I don't think I've ever really shared how I became an astrologer. And when I sat down to think about my journey, I realized there wasn't just one moment. There were actually three very distinct moments that shaped my journey, three experiences that completely shaped the way in which I see astrology today. Germany taught me how to think, my Turkish culture taught me my intuition, and my birth chart taught me purpose. So I want to start with Germany first. So let's dive right into today's podcast. I grew up in Germany, and in high school, I had a German literature teacher that was absolutely unforgettable. And when I say unforgettable, it is because if you've ever met a Leo with Leo rising, you already know this kind of energy or where this story is going. He definitely had this sort of aura about him. He had this particular energy about him. And also he had a giant lion's mane of hair. We would always joke that he looked like he was floating. He had like a distinct way of walking. Every time he would approach a classroom, we had these giant, windows. So we could see when somebody was coming through the corridors and then there was a courtyard outside of where the classroom was at. And so every time he would approach the classroom, we were all just like laughing because he literally looked like he was floating. He also had a larger than life personality, very dramatic way of teaching his classes, like tons of storytelling, tons of charisma. So he wasn't just someone who simply taught some kind of information. He definitely had a presence in the room. So you could feel when he, was even shifting sort of the subject, he made learning feel super exciting. So those are the things that I remember of him as far as like kind of giving you a picture of what my teacher was like. Now, one of his favorite topics was the Roman Empire. And I know that sounds maybe random to some of you, but definitely stay with me because this is actually where astrology entered my life in a very serious way. One day, he was talking and lecturing about Augustus. And I think that is how you pronounce it in English. In German, you would pronounce Augustus, Augustus. For those of you who don't know who Augustus is, he became the first emperor of Rome. He transformed Rome from a republic into an empire and became one of the most powerful men in history. My teacher explained that Augustus publicly associated himself with Capricorn. And I just remember the first time when I heard that, a part of me was like, Capricorn? It was like Capricorn, the horoscope Capricorn. It was a little bit confusing at the time. And I kept thinking about the magazines I would read that had horoscopes in them. But I also remember when we were learning that Capricorn has a particular image or a particular image that's associated with Capricorn, and it appeared on Roman coins and monuments and military standards and imperial symbolism. And that is when I started really paying attention because it was fascinating to me, not because of Capricorn specifically, but because of what it represented. I remember thinking, wait a second, why would one of the most powerful men in history put an astrological symbol on money? Because money passes through everyone's hands. Why would that matter? And that was the first lesson. Symbols mattered long before social media, long before branding, long before marketing. Leaders understood that symbols create identity. Capricorn represented a specific type of authority. And that is associated, as we know today, with discipline, with structure, legacy, achievement. And whether Augustus personally believed every astrological technique isn't really the point of today's podcast, because that was definitely a debate that we had in that classroom later on. The point is that astrology wasn't viewed as some silly horoscope in a magazine. It was woven into culture, into politics, leadership, history, psychology, human behavior. That completely changed how I viewed horoscopes, how I viewed astrology. And that was just the beginning, because one day my teacher walked into class and drew 4 giant squares on the board. And he drew into each square fire, earth, air, water. He then started placing the zodiac signs into each category. Fire signs weren't random. They were motivated by inspiration, action, courage, experience. Earth signs weren't random. They wanted stability, security, and something tangible to build. Air signs wanted ideas, conversations, connection, curiosity. Water signs, we learned that they move through life emotionally and intuitively. And I just remember just my mind blown, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at random people having random personality traits. Because the more that we started getting into the science, the more I started remembering, oh, my uncle is a Cancer, and my aunt is a Scorpio, and my other uncle, he is a Libra. So I was seeing patterns, and I became obsessed. Not the fact that astrology could do predictions, because at the time we didn't go into that. We didn't go into the predictive, pattern or the predictive methodologies. We basically started just talking about the traits and the patterns and the archetypes. Why some people reinvent themselves after hardship. Why some people naturally lead. Why some people need freedom, and they absolutely need it. Why others need safety. Astrology became a framework for understanding human behavior. But here's what's interesting. Even though I found all of this intellectually fascinating, astrology never really, to begin with, felt strange to me, because I was growing up in a Turkish household. And that brings me to the second thing that made me an astrologer. My culture taught me intuition and psychic abilities. Growing up in a Turkish family, intuition wasn't something talked about in self-help books. In fact, at the time, I didn't even ever heard of the self-help aisle in a bookstore. That just didn't exist in Germany, by the way. I have another story about that, but later. So intuition is part of everyday life in the Turkish culture. Family gatherings often ended with someone reading a Turkish coffee cup or playing cards. Always. Somebody was talking about something in the future or what might happen. Somebody was always talking about interpreting somebody's dreams, discussing science within the dream. For example, I remember one of the earlier memories I have from this is one day, one of our neighbors, she dreamt about teeth. And in the Turkish culture, teeth are associated with someone either becoming ill or some death that follows after seeing the teeth. But of course, the context of all of that matters a lot. So there was always someone discussing something, predicting something. And nobody thought it was unusual. It was all normal. I remember sitting around the kitchen tables with family and neighbors, and just always being exposed to these coffee cup readings. And eventually I ended up starting to read them too. I was 9 when I did my first coffee cup reading. I remember that. I remember my aunt asking me to read the coffee cup, and this was really like the norm. The coffee cups would be turned upside down. For many of you that maybe don't know what the Turkish coffee cup is all about, you basically, it's like a shot of espresso. You drink it, you turn the cup upside down, and then everybody waits for them to cool. And then someone would start interpreting the symbols, the roads, the birds. I mean, often there's hearts in there, opportunities, warnings, stories that you start putting together. There's like certain things in the cup that, create patterns. And I have to say that the person who influenced me the most was my aunt. To this day, she is one of the most intuitive people I have ever met. And honestly, one of the most psychic people that I know. Like, her predictions with many people were unbelievably accurate. I mean, unbelievably accurate. I mean, I still call her to this day when I need something. And I don't do it on the weekly basis anymore, which I'm really sad about, but she is just so accurate. Like, there is such accuracy. It's kind of crazy. She could see things beneath everything, like beneath the surface, and she understands motivations without even knowing the person, notice things that most people would absolutely miss. And I often joke with her now that all those years of Turkish coffee cup readings somehow turned into a career. Because, like, look at me now, because looking back, those experiences taught me something really important. They taught me that intuition really, really matters. Not just like logic. Your intuition alongside logic really is a framework for doing this type of work. And Germany taught me that framework. And Turkey, or the Turkish culture that I'm from, taught me this intuition. And eventually, those two worlds, they kind of collided, and then came the third thing, because I was growing up and I never stopped really reading about astrology. Like, anything that I could read about astrology, I would be interested in. The Turkish coffee cup, gatherings, they did continue. And then I grew up to be older, and I moved away from home. And so the third thing that kind of shaped my astrology journey is an astrology reading from someone that was referred to me by a yoga studio that I was going to. There was this girl, we were friends. She knew this guy that was an astrologer. And my first, serious astrology reading was done by this person. And he ended up actually being a mentor for about 2 years. So years later, I had sat down to do this, reading with this teacher and this mentor. And he read my actual chart, my birth chart. And so it was crazy, because my North Node in Cancer in the 10th house, my Venus at 29 degrees in Leo in the 11th house, and my Saturn-Pluto conjunction, all of these terms started to come alive when he was doing the reading. And I remember feeling something I'd never experienced before. I really felt seen. I really felt like he understood my story. I felt like he understood the language of what I was experiencing as a human being. We talked about my childhood. We talked about responsibilities and transformation and visibility, purpose in life and leadership, and building something meaningful. So for the first time, I could see that some of the struggles that I had experienced, they were not random. They were shaping me. And they were shaping the challenges that I've experienced. And these challenges I was meant to experience. And I understood why I felt so different. The moment that forced me to reinvent myself. And in fact, at the time, I was in my mid-20s. I was still headed to my Saturn return. He explained what would happen with my Saturn return. He explained that I would go through a hardship with a relationship, a really big, breakup, and I was married at the time. I didn't think that I was going to get divorced. So I kind of just listened to that and I thought, wow, I hope this is not true. And a couple of years later, it was. So I started to begin to see my story much, much deeper. And perhaps the most important realization was that my purpose wasn't just to understand astrology. My purpose was to use it to help other people understand themselves as well. That reading stayed with me for years. I mean, to this day. And eventually in 2016, I made a decision. At the time, I owned a yoga studio in Colorado Springs. And I decided to stop studying and doing readings astrologically and intuitively privately. And I wanted to start sharing it. So I ended up applying to be part of the Astrologer channel. And thanks to Lada, I got an opportunity to work for her channel. And that whole experience just blew my mind. And if it wasn't for Astrologer, I probably would have not come out publicly the way that I did or launched my business the way that I did. Maybe there was another way that I was going to do it, but that platform really exposed me to a lot of people. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And at the time, it was just so fun to see how many people were into astrology. I had no idea what that world and that decision would lead to. I never imagined I would be sitting here recording a podcast that got listened to by many people all over the world. I never imagined astrology would become my career. So that's how it all kind of got shaped. Never imagined that a German literature teacher, Roman history, Turkish coffee cup readings, intuitions, symbolism, and my very own birth chart would somehow come together into the work that I do today. But that's exactly what happened. And when people ask me how I became an astrologer, that's the answer. This is how it all became to be. So my birth chart taught definitely my purpose. I do remember having another reading later where another very important astrology teacher really shaped in the way in which I read the charts. And he said one thing to me, and that was, nothing in your chart is random. Everything has to be taken to a point of radical self-responsibility. And he pointed out to me that between my North Node and my Venus being at an ecliptic point, he said, this is like God pointing his finger at you, that you must do something that will help others to empower themselves and has to become in the public realm. And no matter what you do, even if you refuse to do it, it will somehow find its way to you, that you would have to do this, that you would have to step up and be someone that will help other people. And this is not the truth for everybody, but definitely the truth for me in my chart. And that's the cosmic tea, my friends. Thank you so much for listening today. What is your story? How did you learn astrology? How did you come to astrology? I would love to know. There is a way to message me. You can also DM me on my social platforms. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.